The gates of the Apostolic Palace had been quiet all week. Since the private moment when Pope Leo XIV had brought Tiberius home, neither had been seen in public. No speeches had been given. No statements released. No photos leaked. The Vatican press office had tried to manage the curiosity swirling outside its walls, issuing only the briefest of updates. His Holiness and Tiberius are well and resting in the Lord's peace. But inside the Vatican walls, the story was much more complex. Tiberius, though now safe within the Pope's private residence, had remained withdrawn. He ate sparingly. He wandered the halls with his nose pressed low to the floor, as if searching for something or someone just out of reach. And Leo XIV. He watched silently, never forcing closeness. He knew grief had its own rhythm. Each morning he would rise early, sit in the corner of the papal library with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, and simply watch Tiberius sleep on the rug near the window. No commands. No expectations. Just waiting. Waiting for the moment when the dog might finally look up and smile again. And though no one dared ask the Holy Father aloud, the whispers floated through the corridors. Had Leo made the wrong choice? Had he adopted a wound too deep to heal? But deep in his heart, the Pope believed something no one else had dared to voice. Sometimes, to heal a heart, you must simply sit long enough for it to remember how to live again. The request came quietly that morning. Leo XIV, after a week of silent companionship, leaned toward his secretary and whispered, "Prepare the gardens. I think we're ready." The secretary, surprised but hopeful, bowed slightly and hurried to the staff. Word spread through the inner corridors faster than protocol could manage. The Pope is taking Tiberius outside. The gardeners, usually alone in the early hours, were given discreet orders to clear the space, not to lock it down, not to turn it into spectacle, but to let it breathe. By mid-morning, the gates to the Vatican gardens stood slightly ajar. A private space, hidden from the crowds, alive with the scent of blooming jasmine and ancient olive trees. Leo stood at the threshold with Tiberius at his side, no leash, no handlers. Just a man and a dog facing the world outside their shared silence. The Pope knelt slowly, lowering himself to Tiberius' level. "Shall we try together?" Tiberius lifted his head, ears flicking toward the open air. And then, for the first time in days, he stood. Not hesitant. Not heavy. Ready. The Pope smiled softly, rising to his feet. They took the first step. And then another. And soon they were walking side by side, down the sunlit paths where saints had once wandered in prayer. The gardeners watched from a distance, hands over their mouths, unsure whether they were witnessing something holy or something human. And perhaps for the first time in a long while, those two things felt like the same thing. They walked for nearly 15 minutes. Slow. Unrushed. Tiberius stayed close to Leo's side at first, as if still unsure whether this freedom was real. His tail hung low but no longer tucked in fear. His ears twitched at every new sound, the breeze rustling the lemon trees, the distant hum of the Vatican fountains. And then something changed. It started when a small butterfly flitted across their path. Tiberius lifted his head. His ears perked. His tail gave the faintest of wags. Leo XIV, sensing the shift, stopped walking. He knelt again, this time sitting fully on the grass, crossing his legs like a man who had no titles, no thrones, no duties pressing on his back. "Go on," he whispered, "you're free." Tiberius stood perfectly still for a heartbeat. And then he ran. Not far. Just enough to feel the earth under his paws. He circled once. Then again. His tail wagged freely now, brushing the air like a banner of life returning. Leo leaned back on his hands, watching with glistening eyes. "He's back," the Pope whispered to himself. Tiberius bounded toward a tree, sniffed the base, kicked up a little dust with his paws, then turned back toward Leo, ears up, eyes bright. He wanted to play. For the first time since Francis had left this world, Tiberius was alive again. And Leo XIV. He let out the first genuine, unguarded laugh he had allowed himself since the moment the white smoke rose. The gardeners watching from a distance felt their own chests ache, not from duty but from hope. Because in that moment, the world's oldest kingdom felt young again. Tiberius lowered his front paws, tail wagging high in the air. It was a universal invitation. A dog's way of saying, "Let's play." Leo XIV looked around as if to ask permission, but no one dared interrupt. The Pope leaned forward, brushing the grass with his fingertips, and did something no one expected from the leader of the largest religious institution on earth. He lunged playfully toward Tiberius. The dog jumped back, wagging harder. And the game began. The 68-year-old Pope chased him, awkwardly, breathlessly, laughing so freely it echoed off the garden walls. Tiberius darted between olive trees, circling back toward Leo, barking softly in excitement, stopping just long enough to let the Pope almost catch him, before sprinting off again. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned. It was human. Real. Leo finally dropped onto the grass, arms spread wide, laughing too hard to continue the chase. Tiberius trotted back to him, tongue hanging out, and collapsed beside him, pressing his body into the Pope's side, letting out a deep, satisfied sigh. Leo rested his hand on the dog's back. "You're still here. And I'm still alive." It wasn't just play. It was resurrection. The guards stationed at a respectful distance lowered their heads, some wiping tears they would never admit to shedding. No sermon could have preached louder. No doctrine could have reached deeper. Because in that sacred moment, a man who had just inherited the heaviest title on earth had just been taught to breathe again by a creature the world once called just a dog. The gardens had never felt smaller. Word spread quickly among the inner circle. "The Pope is playing with the dog." A few brave souls, gardeners, guards, priests, peeked around hedges and through windows. They stood silently, afraid to disturb what felt too sacred to interrupt. Some pulled out their phones, but none dared take a picture. Something inside them knew this moment wasn't theirs to capture. It belonged to life itself. One of the oldest gardeners, a man who had served under 3 popes, removed his hat and held it over his heart. His lips quivered as he whispered to no one in particular, "I haven't seen this garden alive like this since John Paul ran here with children." Others nodded softly. They knew what they were seeing was more than relief. It was a man becoming small enough to be real. A man who had carried the burdens of power, yet now lay on the grass, smiling like a child unburdened. Tiberius pawed gently at the Pope's robes, as if asking him to get up and run again. Leo looked toward the hidden onlookers and smiled softly, lifting a hand, not to wave, but to reassure them that this was safe, this was right. He leaned toward the dog, whispering something they could not hear. And then he did something even more unexpected. Leo XIV stood up, turned toward those quietly watching, and invited them in with a simple gesture. "Come," he called out softly. "Come, see what joy looks like when you stop trying to control it." They came forward slowly, the gardeners, the priests, the guards. Not in rows. Not in formation. As people. Leo XIV waited for them, standing barefoot now, having slipped off his shoes somewhere along the path without realizing it. His white robes brushed the grass, but he looked lighter than ever. Tiberius sat proudly at his side, tongue lolling, chest rising and falling with the easy rhythm of contentment. Leo gestured for them to gather close, not in a circle of reverence, but in a family's embrace. The Pope looked at them, not as employees, not as subordinates, but as fellow pilgrims who had just witnessed something sacred. And then he finally spoke. Not with doctrine. Not with authority. With something far more human. "I haven't heard my own laughter in a week." He paused, voice thick with emotion. "And today this little one gave it back to me." Some smiled. Some lowered their heads. Leo knelt beside Tiberius again, running his fingers through the dog's fur. "When I first brought him here," the Pope continued softly, "I wasn't sure if I was rescuing him, or if he was here to rescue me." He looked toward the faces gathered around him. "But I see it clearly now. He isn't here to fill Francisco's absence. He's here to remind me that love never really leaves." Tiberius leaned into his side as if to seal the moment. And the Pope, for the first time since his election, looked at the sky and smiled without fear. The air grew still again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It felt alive. Leo XIV stood, placing a hand over his heart. The faces before him waited, not out of duty, but out of love. And then he said it. "I used to think grief was an empty room, filled with echoes of what used to be." He glanced down at Tiberius, who gazed back as if holding space for the words yet to come. "But today, when I laughed, when I felt his weight against me, it felt like I was speaking with Francis himself." He paused, smiling softly through misted eyes. "Not with words. Not with memory. But with the kind of presence that doesn't need to be explained, because your heart already knows it's real." The wind stirred the trees above them. Leo turned his gaze toward the small gathering once more. I realize now, love never dies. It changes form. It moves quietly. It waits for us, in laughter, in play, in every moment we dare to live fully again. He knelt one last time before Tiberius, whispering softly, "You've done more for me than I'll ever do for you." And then, rising again with a deep breath, he turned toward his friends, his brothers, his witnesses. "This little one reminded me today." He lifted his hand gently. "We are never truly alone. Not when we carry love that still breathes through others, even when they've gone." The small crowd stood in silence, letting the lesson settle into their bones. And in that sacred stillness, the world learned again that healing comes not when we forget, but when we dare to live as if love has never left us.